My family left me alone on Mother's Day lunch and used my money for a family cruise. When they came back, I had sold all the family's assets. They had nowhere left to live. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I woke up that Mother's Day morning with a flutter of anticipation in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. At 65, I'd learned not to expect too much from holidays, but something about this particular Sunday felt different. Maybe it was the way the morning light streamed through my kitchen window, or the fact that I'd actually slept well for once. Whatever it was, I felt hopeful. I'd been planning this lunch for weeks. Sarah, my daughter, had promised to bring Marcus and the kids over at noon. "Just family time, Mom," she'd said over the phone, her voice warm with what I thought was genuine affection. "The kids are so excited to see Grandma." I spent the entire morning in the kitchen, my hands working with the muscle memory of decades spent cooking for people I loved. The roast went into the oven at 9 sharp, its rich aroma soon filling every corner of my modest home. I made Sarah's favorite honey-glazed carrots, the ones she used to beg for as a child. The mashed potatoes were whipped to perfection, and I even attempted Marcus's preferred green bean casserole, though I'd never quite mastered his mother's recipe. The dining table became my canvas. I pulled out the good china, the set that had been my mother's, the one I rarely used anymore because Sarah had always been too busy for formal dinners. The crystal glasses caught the afternoon light, casting tiny rainbows across the cream-colored tablecloth. I folded the napkins the way my mother had taught me, creating little pockets that could hold small surprises. In this case, I'd tucked a photo of each grandchild into their respective napkins, candid shots I'd taken during their last visit months ago. By 11:30, everything was ready. The house smelled like comfort and tradition, like the home I'd tried so hard to maintain for my family even after my husband passed 3 years ago. I changed into the blue dress Sarah had complimented last Christmas, applied a touch of lipstick, and waited. Noon came and went. I told myself they were just running late. Marcus was notorious for losing track of time, and wrangling 2 kids out the door was never easy. I kept the food warm, checking my phone every few minutes for messages that never came. At 12:30, I called Sarah. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, honey," I said, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. "Just checking to see if you're running late. The food's ready whenever you are." 1 o'clock. Still nothing. I called again, and again it went straight to voicemail. This time I didn't leave a message. My hands were starting to shake slightly, that familiar anxious tremor that had plagued me since Richard's death. At 1:15, I tried Marcus's phone. The call connected, but all I heard was noise in the background, voices, music, what sounded like an announcement over a loudspeaker. Then the line went dead. I sat at the dining table, staring at the empty chairs, the carefully arranged place settings, the slowly cooling food. The silence in the house felt heavy, oppressive. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick more loudly than usual, each second marking another moment of my growing realization that something was terribly wrong. By 2 o'clock, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my phone and opened Facebook, something I rarely did but that Sarah was always encouraging me to use more. "You need to stay connected, Mom," she'd say. "See what we're all up to." I typed Sarah's name into the search bar with fingers that felt numb and clumsy. Her profile appeared immediately, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. There she was, smiling broadly at the camera, her arm around Marcus. Behind them, I could see a ship's railing and the endless blue of the ocean. The timestamp read, 2 hours ago. The caption made my stomach drop. "Family Cruise Day 3. The kids are having the time of their lives. Sometimes you just need to escape and make memories. Blessed, our family time Tarsh cruise life." I scrolled down, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. More photos. Marcus with the kids at what looked like a ship's pool. Sarah raising a colorful drink toward the camera. The whole family posing in front of a cruise ship's buffet. All posted within the last few days. All showing them living their best life while I sat alone at a table set for 6. The phone slipped from my hands and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I stared at the empty dining room, at the meal that would go uneaten, at the napkins with their hidden photos that would never be opened. The house was so quiet I could hear my own ragged breathing. They weren't late. They weren't coming. They were on a cruise, laughing and celebrating while I waited like a fool in my blue dress with my perfect table and my breaking heart. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment. It was the realization that they'd planned this. They'd known for days, maybe weeks, that they wouldn't be here. Sarah had looked me in the eye and promised to come, knowing full well she'd be hundreds of miles away on the ocean. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest where warmth used to live. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's smiling face on that ship, her arm around Marcus, both of them looking so carefree and happy while I'd been setting a table for ghosts. By dawn, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at my phone. I needed to know more. I needed to understand how this had happened, how my own daughter could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly. My fingers, still trembling slightly from exhaustion and hurt, navigated back to Sarah's Facebook page. This time I dug deeper. I scrolled past the recent cruise photos to posts from the weeks before. There it was, a post from 3 weeks ago that made my chest tighten. Can't wait for our family getaway. The kids deserve some fun after Marcus's stressful few months at work. Sometimes you have to prioritize what really matters. What really matters. Apparently, that didn't include their 65-year-old mother spending Mother's Day alone. But it was the comments that truly twisted the knife. Sarah's friend Jennifer had written, "You guys deserve this. After everything with Marcus's job situation, you need the break." Sarah had replied with a heart emoji and, "Thanks, babe. We're so grateful we could make it work financially." Financially. The word hit me like a physical blow because suddenly, horribly, I knew exactly how they'd made it work financially. 2 months ago, Sarah had called me in tears. Marcus had been demoted at work, she'd said. They were struggling to make ends meet, couldn't afford groceries, were behind on their mortgage. She'd been sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you help us? Just until Marcus gets back on his feet? We're desperate." I'd transferred $15,000 to her account the next day. My savings, money I'd been careful with since Richard's death, money I'd planned to use for small luxuries in my retirement. But what good was money when your family was suffering? "It's just a loan, Mom," Sarah had assured me when she called to thank me. "We'll pay you back as soon as things improve." I pulled up my banking app with shaking hands, scrolling back to find that transaction. There it was, $15,000, transferred on March 15th. Exactly the amount I'd calculated a decent cruise for a family of 4 would cost. My daughter had looked me in the eye, cried genuine tears, and lied about her husband's job situation to get money for a vacation. A vacation they'd planned to take over Mother's Day weekend, knowing it would leave me completely alone. I set the phone down carefully, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I held it any longer. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in on me. I walked to the living room, then to the dining room where yesterday's disaster still waited, the table still set with my mother's china, the food containers still sitting on the counter where I'd mechanically put them after hours of waiting. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times. Monday morning. Sarah would probably be having breakfast on the ship right now, maybe at some elaborate buffet, feeding the kids fresh fruit and pastries while I stood in my bathrobe surrounded by the evidence of my own foolishness. My phone buzzed. A text message. "Mom, sorry about yesterday. Marcus came down with food poisoning and we had to rush him to urgent care. Rain check on lunch? Hope you weren't too disappointed. Love you." I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each reading made my hands shake harder. Food poisoning. That was her story. Not only had she stolen my money and abandoned me on Mother's Day, but now she was adding insult to injury with another lie. As if I hadn't seen the photos of her toasting with colorful drinks on the deck of a cruise ship. I walked to my laptop and pulled up Sarah's Facebook page on the larger screen. I screenshot every single photo from the cruise, every comment, every timestamp. The evidence was all there, them boarding the ship on Friday, the photos from Saturday and Sunday showing them clearly having the time of their lives. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for the cruise line's information. A quick call to their customer service, pretending to be Sarah trying to confirm our booking details, gave me everything I needed. The cruise had been booked 6 weeks ago, paid in full, for a family of 4, 6 weeks ago. A full month before Sarah's tearful call about Marcus's supposed demotion. I sat back in my desk chair, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, or even a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, premeditated deception. They'd planned to take my money and abandon me from the very beginning. The worst part was how good Sarah had been at it. The tears, the desperation, the detailed story about Marcus's work troubles. She'd played me like a violin, and I'd danced to every note. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, probably calling to elaborate on her food poisoning story. I stared at it, letting it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I listened to her message. "Hi, Mom, it's me again. I know you're probably worried sick about Marcus. He's feeling a little better today, but we're going to lay low for a few more days until he's completely recovered. I'll call you soon to reschedule. Okay? Love you so much." The casual way she lied, the concern in her voice that she'd manufactured just for my benefit. It was masterful. If I hadn't seen those photos, I would have believed every word. But I had seen them. I knew the truth. And now I had to decide what to do with it. I walked back to the dining room and began clearing the table, moving slowly and deliberately. Each plate I stacked, each glass I carried to the kitchen, felt like a small act of reclamation. I was taking back my space, my dignity, my right to not be treated like a fool. As I folded my mother's tablecloth, I made a decision. Sarah wanted to play games with money? Fine. But she was about to learn that two could play that game, and I intended to win. I spent Tuesday morning doing something I'd never done before, researching my own financial entanglements with my daughter's life. It was amazing how much you could discover when you stopped being a trusting mother and started being a careful investigator. The house came first. Sarah and Marcus lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in one of the better neighborhoods in town. What they'd never told their friends, what didn't appear on any social media posts, was that I'd provided the down payment. $60,000 from my and Richard's retirement savings, given freely when Sarah was pregnant with their first child. "We want the baby to grow up somewhere stable," she'd said, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Somewhere safe, with good schools. But we just can't swing the down payment on Marcus's salary alone." I'd written the check without hesitation. What grandmother wouldn't want her grandchildren to have a beautiful, safe home? But here was the interesting part that I'd forgotten in my eagerness to help. The deed listed me as a co-owner. The lawyer had insisted on it at the time, and I'd gone along with it thinking it was just a formality. Now I realized it wasn't a formality at all. It was protection. My name was on that house. Legally, I owned half of it. I pulled out the folder where I kept all my important papers, something Richard had always insisted on, bless his organized soul. There it was, my copy of the deed, clear as day. Sarah Brennan and Colleen Brennan, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Next, I looked up the cars. The BMW Marcus drove had been a graduation present when he finished his MBA 3 years ago. $28,000 I'd spent because Sarah had convinced me it would help him get better job opportunities. "Image matters in his field, Mom," she'd explained. "You have to look successful to be successful." The title search on the DMV website showed what I'd suspected. The car was registered in my name. I'd bought it outright to avoid them having car payments, and we'd simply never transferred the title. Then there was the furniture. When they'd moved into the house, they'd had nothing but college dorm leftovers and a few wedding gifts. I'd furnished almost the entire place: living room set, dining room table, bedroom furniture, even the kids' rooms. I had receipts for all of it, stored neatly in another folder Richard had labeled tax deductions, gifts to children. The pool table in their basement that Marcus loved so much? Mine. The vintage china cabinet Sarah displayed her wedding dishes in? Mine. The kids' elaborate swing set in the backyard? Mine. I'd been so generous, so eager to help them start their life together. And they'd been so willing to let me. But generosity had limits, and mine had just been reached. Wednesday morning, I called my lawyer. James Morrison had handled Richard's estate and had been checking in on me periodically since then. He was a kind man in his 70s, with grandchildren of his own, and I trusted him completely. "Colleen," he said warmly when his secretary put me through. "How nice to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well, James, but I need some advice about property rights." I explained the situation carefully, without emotion, sticking to the facts. James listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. "Well," he said finally, "legally speaking, you're in a very strong position. Joint tenancy means you have equal ownership rights to the house. And if the car is titled in your name, it's your car, regardless of who's been driving it. And the furniture? Gift law can be tricky, but if you have receipts and can prove you intended them as loans rather than gifts, you might have recourse there too, especially given the circumstances. What would you recommend?" There was a pause. "Colleen, I have to ask, are you sure you want to pursue this? Family disputes can get very ugly, very quickly." I thought about Sarah's smiling face on that cruise ship, about the careful lies she'd told, about spending Mother's Day alone while they lived it up on my money. "I'm sure, James. All right then. Let me do some research and draw up the proper paperwork. But Colleen, if you're going to do this, you need to be prepared for the fallout. This won't just affect your relationship with Sarah. It'll affect your relationship with your grandchildren too." That hit me hard. The kids were innocent in all this. They didn't know their parents were liars and thieves, but they'd suffer when the consequences came. "I understand," I said quietly. "Give me a few days to prepare everything. And Colleen, think carefully about timing. The element of surprise will be crucial if you want this to work." After I hung up, I sat in Richard's old office chair, surrounded by files and documents and evidence of my family's betrayal. The rational part of my mind knew James was right. This would destroy my relationship with Sarah, possibly forever. I might never see my grandchildren again. But the hurt part of my mind, the part that had been growing stronger since Monday morning, whispered something else. What relationship? What did I really have with them except the role of family ATM? When was the last time Sarah had called just to chat? When was the last time she'd asked about my day, my health, my feelings? When was the last time any of them had shown interest in me as a person rather than as a resource? I couldn't remember. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I drove past their house, not to visit, just to look. It was a beautiful house, no question about it. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds bursting with spring blooms. Sarah's Instagram-worthy life on full display. A life I'd bought and paid for. Their cars weren't in the driveway. They were probably still enjoying their cruise, maybe extending it a few days on my dime. The house looked empty, peaceful, unaware that its days as Sarah and Marcus's paradise were numbered. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Another lie about Marcus's fictional food poisoning. Another promise to call soon. Another casual manipulation wrapped in fake concern. I deleted it without responding. By Thursday evening, James called back. "I have everything ready," he said. "The paperwork to claim your property rights, the legal notices, everything. But Colleen, once we start this process, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain?" I looked around my small, quiet house, the house where I'd spent Mother's Day alone while my family partied on a cruise bought with my money. I thought about all the years of generosity that had been met with lies, all the love that had been answered with greed. "I'm certain, James." "All right then. When do you want to proceed? How long will they be gone?" According to the cruise line's website, that particular cruise returns Sunday. I smiled for the first time since Monday. "Let's wait until Monday afternoon. I want them to come home to the full reality of their choices." Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed fitting for what I was about to do. I'd barely slept, but it wasn't from anxiety, it was from anticipation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own life, instead of letting others dictate how I should feel and behave. James arrived at 9 sharp with a folder thick with legal documents and a team of 3 men he'd hired for the day. "These are professional movers," he explained as we stood in my driveway. "They know how to handle delicate situations, and they're bonded and insured." I'd given him keys to Sarah's house, keys she'd insisted I keep for emergencies. I supposed this qualified as an emergency, just not the kind she'd envisioned. The plan was simple and legally airtight. As co-owner of the house, I had every right to remove my property. The car titled in my name would be towed to a secure lot. The furniture I'd purchased would be moved to a storage facility until I decided what to do with it. "The BMW first," I told the movers as we pulled into Sarah's driveway. "It's the silver one." Watching them load Marcus's precious car onto the tow truck gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. He loved that car more than some people loved their children, was always posting photos of himself leaning against it, always bragging about its features to anyone who'd listen. Now it was going to spend some time in an impound lot, and he'd have to prove ownership to get it back. Ownership he couldn't prove because he didn't have it. Inside the house, I moved through the rooms methodically, directing the movers to take everything I'd paid for. The living room set went first. The leather sofa Sarah had spent weeks picking out, the matching chairs, the coffee table that had cost more than some people's cars. The dining room was next, the table where they'd hosted dinner parties, always making sure to mention how lucky they were to have found such beautiful pieces. What they'd never mentioned was that their generous mother had bought every stick of it. In the master bedroom, I had them take the bed, the dresser, even the mattress. I'd replaced their college futon with a king-size memory foam set when Sarah complained about back pain during her first pregnancy. Apparently, my comfort with their lies was more problematic than her comfort while sleeping. The kids' rooms were harder. I stood in the doorway of 8-year-old Emma's room, looking at the canopy bed I'd bought for her 5th birthday, the matching dresser and bookshelf, the rocking chair where I used to read her stories. For a moment, my resolve wavered. But then I remembered the photos of them laughing on the cruise ship while I sat alone on Mother's Day, and my heart hardened again. The children would be fine. Children were resilient. It was their parents who needed to learn some hard lessons about honesty and respect. "Take it all," I told the movers. By noon, the house was nearly empty. What remained were the few pieces Sarah and Marcus had actually bought themselves: a cheap bookshelf from their college days, a small television, some odds and ends they'd received as wedding gifts. It looked pathetic, like a house that had been robbed, which I supposed it had been, by them, from me, over the course of years. The movers were professionals. They worked efficiently and quietly, treating each piece with care despite the unusual circumstances. When one of them asked if I was sure about taking the children's beds, I simply nodded. I was sure about everything. "The pool table last," I instructed as they headed to the basement. Marcus had spent countless hours down there, playing with his friends, bragging about his man cave. What he'd conveniently forgotten was that every single item in that cave had been purchased by his wife's mother. As they maneuvered the heavy table up the basement stairs, I walked through the empty house one final time. The hardwood floors looked bare and cold without the expensive rugs I'd bought. The walls seemed hollow without the artwork I'd helped them select. Windows that had once been dressed with custom curtains now stared nakedly out at the world. This was what their life looked like without my subsidies. Empty, uncomfortable, reduced to the bare minimum they'd actually earned themselves. I left an envelope on the kitchen counter, the only surface in the room that remained. Inside was a letter I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, finally settling on something direct and unemotional. "Sarah and Marcus, I hope you enjoyed your cruise. As you can see, I've reclaimed the property that belongs to me. This includes the house. Check the deed. I'm a co-owner. The BMW, titled in my name, and all furniture purchased with my money over the years. I know this comes as a shock, but not nearly as much of a shock as discovering my Mother's Day money was spent on a family vacation that didn't include the mother. The storage facility information is attached if you'd like to discuss purchasing any of the furniture. The car can be retrieved from the impound lot once you can provide proof of ownership, which you cannot do because you don't own it. You've taught me valuable lessons about family loyalty and honesty. Consider this my graduation exercise, Colleen. I signed it with the same pen I'd used to write the check that paid for their cruise. By 2 o'clock, everything was done. The movers had earned their fee, loading truck after truck with the remnants of my generosity. James had filed all the necessary paperwork with the courthouse, making everything legal and official. "Are you satisfied?" he asked as we stood in my driveway, watching the last truck disappear around the corner. I considered the question. Was I satisfied? I felt lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there. For years, I'd been funding their lifestyle while getting nothing but lies in return. Now suddenly, that was over. "Yes," I said. "I think I am. They'll probably try to contact you when they get home. I'm sure they will. And I think I'm going to be very busy for the foreseeable future. Too busy to take calls from people who lie to me about being sick while they're actually vacationing on my money." James smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. "Good for you, Colleen. It's about time you put yourself first." As I watched him drive away, I realized he was right. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was putting myself first. Not being the generous mother, not being the reliable grandmother, not being the woman who always said yes when her family needed something, just being Colleen. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. My phone was already starting to ring. Sarah's number flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Whatever she had to say, whatever lies she wanted to tell, whatever manipulation she wanted to try, I wasn't interested anymore. I had places to go and a new life to build, one where I wouldn't be taken advantage of ever again. They showed up at my door Tuesday evening, just as I was finishing a quiet dinner for one. I'd spent the day organizing the storage unit, deciding what furniture I wanted to keep and what I might sell. It had been strangely therapeutic, going through each piece and remembering when I'd bought it, why I'd thought it would make their lives better. The pounding on my front door was violent, desperate. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Sarah stood there with Marcus behind her, both of them looking disheveled and frantic. The kids weren't with them, probably dropped off with Marcus's mother while they came to deal with their crazy mother-in-law. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Mom." Sarah's voice was tight with barely controlled hysteria. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked calmly. "About what? About what?" Marcus pushed forward, his face red with anger. "About the fact that we came home to an empty house. About the fact that you stole our furniture, our car, everything." "I didn't steal anything," I said evenly. "I reclaimed my own property." "That's our home," Sarah's voice cracked. "Those are our things. Check the deed, sweetheart. It's my home too, and those were my things that I let you use." I could see Sarah's mind racing, trying to find an angle, a way to manipulate the situation back to her advantage. This was the woman who'd convinced me Marcus was sick while posting cruise photos on social media, but for once, I wasn't falling for it. "Mom, please," she said, switching tactics, her voice becoming soft and pleading. "I know you're upset about Mother's Day, but this is extreme. The kids are asking where their beds are. Emma cried herself to sleep on the floor last night." That hit me where she intended it to, right in the grandmother's heart. But I'd prepared for this manipulation too. "Where did Emma sleep on the cruise ship?" I asked quietly. Sarah blinked. "What?" "The cruise ship. The one you took with my $15,000 while I sat alone on Mother's Day. Where did Emma sleep there?" The color drained from Sarah's face. Marcus stepped back slightly, realizing I knew about their lies. We can explain that," Sarah stammered. "Can you? Can you explain how Marcus had food poisoning while simultaneously posting photos of himself at the ship's poolside bar? Can you explain how you needed my money for mortgage payments but somehow managed to book a cruise 6 weeks before you even called me crying?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She'd been caught, and she knew it. "We were going to tell you," Marcus finally said, which was perhaps the stupidest thing he could have said. "When? When were you going to tell me that you stole my money for a vacation? When were you going to tell me that you deliberately abandoned me on Mother's Day? When were you going to stop lying to my face?" We didn't steal anything. Sarah found her voice again, anger replacing panic. You gave us that money. I gave you money for your mortgage, for groceries, for necessities, not for a cruise. You don't understand the pressure we're under, Marcus said, his tone becoming condescending. You live in this little house with no responsibilities. You don't know what it's like to raise kids, to maintain a lifestyle, to maintain a lifestyle? I cut him off. You mean the lifestyle I've been paying for? The house I made the down payment on? The car I bought you? The furniture I purchased so you wouldn't have to sleep on the floor? Those were gifts, Sarah shouted. No, those were investments in people I thought loved me. But you don't love me, do you? Sarah? You love my checkbook. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and true. Sarah's face crumpled, but I wasn't sure if it was genuine emotion or another performance. That's not fair, she whispered. What's not fair is lying to your mother. What's not fair is taking her money under false pretenses. What's not fair is leaving her alone on Mother's Day while you live it up on her dime. We're your family, Marcus said desperately. Family helps each other. You're right, I said. Family does help each other, but this family has been helping in only one direction for years, and I'm done with that arrangement. Sarah straightened up, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes, the look of someone who'd run out of emotional manipulation tactics and was moving to threats. If you don't give us back our things, you'll never see your grandchildren again, she said flatly. The threat hung between us like a blade. She was gambling that my love for Emma and little Tyler would override my sense of self-respect. For a moment, my resolve wavered. The idea of never seeing them again, never reading them stories or watching them grow up, was almost unbearable. But then I thought about the kind of lesson I'd be teaching them if I backed down now. That lies were acceptable. That taking advantage of people who loved you was normal. That grandmother existed to be used, not respected. That's your choice, Sarah, I said quietly. But if you're willing to use your children as weapons against their grandmother, then maybe you're not the mother I thought you were. Sarah stepped back as if I'd slapped her. This is ridiculous, Marcus said, his voice shaking with rage. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her family happy. I'm a woman who got tired of being lied to and stolen from, I corrected. There's a difference. We'll fight this, Sarah said, her voice cold now. We'll take you to court. We'll prove you can't just come into someone's house and steal their belongings. Please do, I said calmly. I'd love to explain to a judge how you used money meant for mortgage payments to fund a cruise. I'd love to show them the timeline of your lies, the screenshots of your social media posts. I'm sure they'll be very interested in your definition of family emergency. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. They both knew they didn't have a legal leg to stand on. You'll regret this, Sarah said finally, her last card played. You'll be all alone, and you'll regret choosing money over family. I didn't choose money over family, I said. You did. The moment you decided to steal from me, the moment you decided to lie to me, the moment you decided I was nothing more than a bank account with emotions. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, listening to them argue on my front porch about what to do next. Eventually, I heard their footsteps retreating, heard car doors slam, heard them drive away. I walked to my kitchen window and watched their taillights disappear down the street. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear or sadness. From relief. From the pure, clean feeling of finally standing up for myself after years of being taken advantage of. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been on Mother's Day. This wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. 3 months later, I was sitting on the deck of a charming cottage overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The cottage was small but perfect, 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen and living area, and this magnificent deck where I'd started having my morning coffee and evening wine. I'd bought it outright with the money from selling Sarah's furniture and the proceeds from selling my own house. Turns out, when you're not supporting an entire family's lifestyle, retirement savings go quite a bit further than you'd expect. The decision to move to Monterey had been surprisingly easy. I'd always loved the ocean, And Richard and I had honeymooned here 40 years ago. It felt like coming full circle, like returning to a place where I'd been truly happy before life got complicated with children and responsibilities and people who confused love with obligation. The first month had been the hardest, not because of regret. I never regretted what I'd done, but because of the silence. No phone calls asking for money, no dramatic emergencies that required my immediate financial intervention, no constant low-level anxiety about what crisis would hit Sarah's family next. It was like recovering from a chronic illness I hadn't realized was slowly killing me. Sarah had tried calling a few times in those first weeks, but I'd blocked her number after the third voicemail that started with, "Mom, we need to talk," and ended with some variation of, "You're being unreasonable." I wasn't being unreasonable. I was being self-protective, and there was a difference. The real healing had started when I began taking morning walks on the beach. At first, it was just something to do, a way to fill the quiet hours. But gradually, I found myself looking forward to those walks, to the rhythm of the waves and the cry of the seagulls and the feeling of salt air in my lungs. It was on one of those walks, about 6 weeks after I'd moved, that I met William. He was sitting on a piece of driftwood, sketching the lighthouse in the distance with surprising skill. I'd noticed him a few times before. A tall, silver-haired man who always seemed to be alone but never seemed lonely. There was something peaceful about him that drew me. "That's beautiful," I said, pausing to admire his work. He looked up with eyes the color of sea glass and smiled. "Thank you. Though I think I'm making the lighthouse too romantic. It's probably just a practical structure, but I can't help seeing it as something more poetic." "Maybe it's both," I suggested. "Maybe practical things can be beautiful too." "I like that philosophy," he said, and then, with the kind of directness that comes with age, "I'm William. I've seen you walking here most mornings. Colleen, and yes, it's become something of a ritual. Would you like to join me? I have an extra cup of coffee in my thermos, and this driftwood is surprisingly comfortable for two." I should have been more cautious. A few months earlier, I would have been. But something about William felt safe, genuine in a way I hadn't encountered in years. That morning coffee turned into a 2-hour conversation about everything and nothing. His late wife, my recent move, his career as a retired marine biologist, my newfound love of coastal living. He didn't ask about my family, didn't probe into my personal life beyond what I volunteered. When I mentioned that I'd recently simplified my living situation, he just nodded thoughtfully and said, "Sometimes less really is more." It wasn't until our third beach meeting that I learned William was quite well off. Not in a flashy way, he drove a practical Toyota and wore comfortable clothes. But he owned several properties along the coast and had invested wisely during his working years. More importantly, he'd learned some hard lessons about family and money. "My daughter lived with me for 3 years after her divorce," he told me as we walked along the water's edge. "At first, I thought I was helping her get back on her feet. Eventually, I realized I was enabling her to avoid growing up. The day I asked her to move out was one of the hardest of my life, but also one of the most necessary." How did she take it? Badly, very badly. She accused me of being selfish, said I was choosing my comfort over her needs. But you know what? Sometimes being a good parent means saying no. Sometimes love requires boundaries. I stopped walking and looked at him, "You understand. I understand that people who truly love you don't try to bankrupt you emotionally or financially. I understand that family shouldn't be a one-way street. And I understand that starting over at our age isn't a tragedy. It's an opportunity." We were married on the beach 6 months later, with just the lighthouse keeper and his wife as witnesses. William had wanted something simple and private, and so had I. We'd both had our big weddings, our complicated family lives, our years of trying to please everyone else. This was just for us. Now, a year later, I wake up every morning in our shared cottage, make coffee for two, and sit on this deck watching the ocean change colors with the light. William is usually beside me, sketching or reading, or simply enjoying the peaceful silence. Sometimes I think about Sarah and the grandchildren I haven't seen. The pain of that loss is real, and I won't pretend otherwise. But But it's a clean pain now, not the infected wound it used to be. I made my choice to protect my own well-being, and she made her choice to prioritize money over relationship. I don't regret either of our choices anymore. Last week, William surprised me with a small sailboat. I thought you might like to learn, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. I've been sailing these waters for 30 years, and I'd love to share them with you. So now I'm learning to sail at 65. Feeling the wind fill the canvas and carry us across the bay toward whatever comes next. William is a patient teacher, and I'm discovering I have a natural affinity for reading the water and the wind. You're a natural, he said yesterday, as I successfully navigated us back to the harbor. I'm a late bloomer, I corrected, and he laughed. The best kind, he said, pulling me close as we watched the sun set over the water. This evening, as I write in the journal I've started keeping, I can hear William humming softly in the kitchen as he prepares dinner. The sound fills me with a contentment I'd forgotten was possible. I am 65 years old, and I am just beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.